Now, so I can see that we have people joining this evening for our Masterclass series exploring neurodiversity. And of course, I'm delighted to be joined by a number of people. Our special guest this evening is Professor Sara Rankin, and also, of course, our colleagues here in the University College Dublin Neurodiversity Working Group, Mr. Ken Kilbride and Miss Beth Kilkenny. I'm Timmy Frawley, and I'm delighted to host this evening's session. Just to say, it's really wonderful to have Prof Rankin back with us. I was fortunate enough to hear you speak about 18 months ago, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. For those of you who don't know Prof Sara Rankin, just a very brief introduction. Sara is Professor of Leukocyte and Stem Cell Biology at the National Heart and Lung Institute, Imperial College London. She is also founder of To Empower, whose aim is to empower more neurodivergent students to undertake STEM degrees and careers in STEM. And as somebody who really believes in science communication, while I don't work in STEM myself, I think it's a key area to encourage. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Prof Rankin, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Great. Brilliant to join you, and especially during Neurodiversity Celebration Week. I mean, it's amazing the amount of events you've got going on. It's brilliant. So I understand that this is being recorded, so I am going to speak quite quickly. But please, remember that you can go back and listen again if you miss any bits. So, and the idea is that it give you an overview of the things that I'm doing at Imperial, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end to have a chat about anything, the areas that particularly interest you and you want to know more about. Okay, so my personal journey, I'm sure this is familiar, this is going to be familiar to lots of you, is the fact that when I was in primary school, I guess I felt very humiliated and frustrated, I think, were the two sort of main things. So humiliated because I was basically, teachers thought that I was slow, probably a bit stupid, and frustrated because I wasn't slow and stupid. I actually had all this stuff going on in my head, but I could not get it down on paper. And if I'm really honest, it's something that I still struggle with. I think the sort of text format, the linearized text format, just does not suit the way my brain works. And I had a passion for science. And so despite people telling me that I could not do it, I sort of persevered. And I think with, as you'll be aware, this audience definitely will be aware of all the sort of challenges associated with being dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD, or being autistic. And for me, my diagnosis came very late. And actually, I was never diagnosed sort of during school, university, or anything like that. And it wasn't, and this is also a very common story of people as old as me, that they actually get their diagnosis when their children have a diagnosis, and suddenly they sort of recognize when the educational psychologist is describing some of their difficulties, it's sort of ringing very true. And in my family, it's quite interesting because my son and I are both dyslexic, and my daughter and husband were definitely not. And I think it's really important. I mean, these are were really first described as learning disabilities, and we think specifically of dyslexia. You think about problems with reading, problems with spelling, and you can see how that affects learning. But actually, as you grow older, or as you grow up, you do not lose these differences in ways of thinking and doing things. And I think that's really also important to note, because it is worth getting a diagnosis even when you're older. So that's something we can come back to. So one of the things, obviously I didn't know this at the time, but there are a lot of very famous historic figures within the scientific community that are neurodivergent, neurodiverse, however you'd like to see them. They have different ways of thinking. And we know those people by their inventions and their insights and their innovations. You know, being the first person to come up with the whole idea of physics or chemistry, for example. And so we're in very good company if you are neurodivergent and you're a scientist. And I am looking at this as a scientist, and I'll come on to why that I think is particularly important for me, because we do historically have all these amazing people. And the reason we have so many scientists that are phenomenal is that there are strengths obviously associated with thinking differently and processing information differently. And I think for me, that's the underlying way of explaining the differences. It's you process information differently. For me, I tend to see things very much in multiple dimensions. I link disparate ideas. I'm incredibly creative, so I have this non-linear thinking ability to think outside the box, tell stories. And my diagnosis originally was that I was borderline dyslexic, but I'm really dyspraxic, clumsiest person around. And also, interestingly, I've now sort of begun to consider whether I have ADHD. And that was something that I never considered about until I went to a really interesting conference that Professor Amanda Kirby ran, which was looking at the gender difference in some of these learning differences and the research that has been done. And I think we're all quite familiar with that now in terms of autistic people, that there's a complete different sort of, well, I would call it a phenotype, being a scientist. But if you look at males versus females with that are autistic, you see that they have quite different traits, and that's the same with ADHD. And the key difference with ADHD is you in women, they're not so hyperactive in a physical sense, but the hyperactivity comes in the brain. And I'm a complete sloth, so I never even thought about ADHD. But actually now, if I look at what are considered the adult sort of traits or characteristics of somebody with ADHD, I tick over sort of 60% of those. So maybe. And I think the point is here that actually most people don't fit into a neat box. And actually the work that Amanda and others have shown is that lots of people don't have a very clear-cut diagnosis of, you know, just dyslexia or just dyspraxia. And that is quite normal. But one of the things that we all share in common as neurodiverse people is we have what people term as this spiky profile, in that there are some things that we are really struggling with. For me, time management and being organized. I have to have a lot of things in place to make sure I get to meetings on time, even during lockdown when that meeting is just in the room next door. And, you know, again, still obviously I can read, but I'm still relatively slow compared with my peers. But then there are other things that I excel at, and that's the sort of ideas, creative thinking, big picture thinking, being visionary. So why I'm particularly focused on STEM education, and why, for me as a scientist, I'm really concerned about young people that have specific learning differences, is this figure. Now, this is just a sort of a visual, because I love a visual way of looking at some of the numbers that have come from the Royal Society. And this is a report. I've got the link to the report there. But basically, if you look in the data from the Department of Education, and this is obviously UK, then the percentage of students identified with SBLD at secondary school is around 12%. Now, I think most of us that are in this sort of area probably think that's an underestimation. But still, looking at that data, if you then look at people at the attainment level for STEM GCSEs at age 16, you see there's a big gap. And this is not even, there's another category here, which are those people that have education plans that do even worse, and those people have real learning disabilities. But these are just people with SBLDs, and we can see that they do significantly worse in science. So already at 16, they're sort of getting a message that they're not going to be very good at science. And this, I think, is really to the way science is taught and the way science is assessed in schools. And the result of all of this is that eventually, when we come to Imperial or other universities, we see that the percentage of students with a diagnosis of an SBLD is only 5%. And academics, whoa, 0.9% have a disclosed SBLD. So there's a really big problem there. And that disclosure is something we can talk about. Is it that it's people like me that never got a diagnosis? Is it people that don't feel confident that they can disclose? Or is it that these people just are not able to get through the academic system? And again, this makes the point. So in the RCA, which is just around the corner from Imperial, we have the complete opposite situation. And we know that people, you know, there are amazing sort of artists that are out and out dyslexic. We know architects, lots of architects are dyslexic. And we also know lots of people that sort of left school because they got so frustrated with the education system, then went on to be great entrepreneurs. And a lot of those are dyslexic. So my, I guess the thing that concerns me is that, you know, if you go back to the days when these people did their studies, you know, we didn't have GCSEs and A-levels, etc. But you've got in the middle, you've got here John Gordon with his Nobel Prize, and he had a horrific, he always shows his school reports telling him basically that do not study science, you're going to be useless at it. And there he is with his Nobel Prize. Now, despite what the education system, and particularly the secondary education system, is telling young people, in businesses, things are starting to change quite dramatically. And you'll all be aware of the fourth revolution, artificial intelligence. And the idea about artificial intelligence is that it's replacing a lot of the sort of basic thinking power. And so a lot of businesses are now looking for people that are neurodiverse. And that's include people that are dyslexic, dyspraxic, ADHD and autistic, because they see these people as non-linear thinkers. They're able to think outside the box and come up with interesting solutions. So these are the people that they are now actively seeking to recruit. And yesterday in the UK, we actually had the launch of a new network called Neurodiversity in Business. And I think that really underscores the fact that businesses are seriously or forgotten the word. That's dyslexia for you. Forgotten the word. But there's so annoying. They're putting the money where their mouth is. They really value dyslexic, neurodiverse thinkers. So they want to recruit people. And actually within business, whereas I think often within the school system and in a lot of businesses and maybe in the university system, we're made to think we are underperforming when we don't do a lot of the sort of basic tasks, and I don't fill out whatever form it is I'm supposed to have filled out on time. Irrespective, but with businesses, they actually aren't so bothered with that, and they're actually interested in providing the support to support you in the areas where you find challenging, because actually what is more valuable for them is all your sort of other cognitive abilities, and so it makes business sense. So let's go back to universities, because it does frustrate me, to be honest. I mean, it's brilliant. I think UCD is doing an amazing job from what I've seen, but it's not common in universities. So I think probably you are the role models for most people. So, but what can universities do? So I think we have to remember that the university employs lots of people that are neurodiverse. So it's not just about students, it's also about staff. And these staff obviously have rights according to the Equality Act. And so we need to think, how are we going to support those people? And I would say to anybody that has a sort of inkling that maybe I am neurodiverse, I think most of us, once we get, for me, once I got to sort of in my 40s, I was seriously like, really, why do I need to get assessed? But actually, if you do, and if you engage in the process, it really helps you to understand your strengths and weaknesses, but really importantly, to self-advocate when you need some adjustment. And that adjustment might be a very minor thing, but it might make a huge difference. There should be staff training. Again, UCD brilliant at this, such as this master talk. So you do a lot of training already. And this is raising awareness, encouraging disclosure. One of the things, it's really valuable, I think, and one of the reasons that I talk about this a lot and I'm quite vocal about it is, as I say, the very low numbers of academics that disclose a neurodiversity. And you need to normalize it. We need to normalize this in the academic system. And I can see why there is resistance to that, because, being an academic that has a problem with reading and writing is doesn't seem to fit well. So I think people don't feel safe to come out and as neurodiverse. But I think the more of us as senior people, and it needs to be senior people that do it, because then it says that actually you can succeed, even though you're neurodiverse, and probably because you are neurodiverse. So there must be more acceptance. As I say, it's about normalizing this. It's just, everybody is different. Everybody is different in so many ways. So, as a scientist, you look at somebody's genetics, we're all different. And so the way their brains are wired could be different as well. It's no big deal. There are lots of specific things, and I'm sure there are loads of books written. I think Amanda Kirby's written a very nice book recently with Theo, and I've forgotten his last name, but with a lot of detail. that there are, you know, if you search the web, you'll find a lot of things. But I've just put a few things here which I think are just very basic, and they can again make a big difference. And it's sort of just allowing people to ask for those differences. I was actually at another debate last night, and somebody was telling me about actually, you know, creating an adjustment menu so that you gave to people. So again, this is about normalizing it. This isn't saying, okay, you need to have a diagnosis to, you know, get this. It's saying, okay, these are the types of adjustments you can have, you know, and all the different things, and so people don't feel you know, bad about asking for something specifically. For me personally, having a big computer screen, huge difference, because I have so many tabs open all at once. I'm always involved in so many different projects. I like working on lots of different things all at one time. So just something like that is important for me. I found when we went into pandemic, it was a nightmare, the back-to-back meetings on Zoom. That just did me in. I was mentally exhausted, but also I couldn't retain information from one meeting to another because I didn't have time to process information. The other game changer for me, in terms of, and I think this is an example of really good universal design, is if you can send out questions 24 hours before an interview for an interview of any position, you will get much better sort of quality answers from the person that you're interviewing. So I would highly recommend that. So the other things we've done at Imperial is set up our staff student network, and this has been a really lovely thing to do. And a lot of networks, and certainly I've been involved in networks that have been set up in business, and they're really about the sort of process end of things. They're all about sort of almost sort of doing HR's job, asking what are the things that we need to change, and having those sort of meetings. Our network is much more about sharing stories, providing a safe space for people to just be themselves. And yeah, and we invite guest speakers, but they, you know, sometimes we're talk. We had one where we had huge numbers of people actually sign up because it was over lockdown, and it was all about how we write and what are different strategies, and yeah, just sharing what a nightmare it is, and finding that there are other, you know, seriously senior people that also find it a nightmare, is good. And then we showcase some of the amazing people, and it's very cool because we do this jointly with Royal College of Art, Royal College of Music, and the V&A. So yeah, I'll have some amazing guests. And last night we had an amazing a meeting, first face-to-face meeting with business, but on the 19th of June, we're actually going to have a festival, which will be a lot of fun. So obviously the other thing we do at a university is teach. So we have to think about how we teach and assess students. And one of the projects I have been involved in is thinking about this, because we don't provide any training. And so essentially this project was about creating a training tool, and we have that. The link is there. We have had some problems with our Rise Articulate that we are addressing at the moment, and once we have got that all hunky-dory, then we are going to be sharing that with anybody that wants, you know, any academics that wants to have a look. You know, it takes about an hour and a half to go through it. It's the sort of very basic 101 of what you should be doing. So recording all your lectures using something like Leganto, etc. What sort of changes to your teaching materials, thinking about ways you teach. You know, don't do tons of group activities. If you know you've got autistic students, they won't like one, everything done with group activities, etc. So it's just getting people to realize that people have different preferences. And one of the things we've really sort of taken to heart is for example, in my masters that I run, I do a data analysis assessment that is now online since lockdown. And one of the things we do in that assessment is it's a 45-minute assessment, but we give all the students 2 hours. So because we don't want people stressing that they don't have enough time. That's not authentic way we work as scientists. And I think that's where we have been going with our assessments. So we don't have exams. Rather than writing essays, we get students to write a grant, and we teach them how to write a grant, which, they really value that so much more. So I think these things are really important. And I actually give a short talk about neurodiversity on my course so that everybody's aware of it. Because yes, you might not, you might not be neurodiverse yourself, but what we want is everybody to have an understanding, because they might have a colleague or a boss in the future. And therefore, it's obviously important. And this is just the point about not giving enough time. This is obviously BBC. So, but assistive technologies, I think this is something where students are obviously really very keen to take. And we now at Imperial have invested in a whole suite. And this is just some of them. I think we've got up to 12 assistive technologies. And they're on the student hub, and actually any student and staff can get them, because we have a lot of international students that have never been diagnosed and don't disclose. So, for example, they could make use of this, and even somebody whose second language is English. Some people, this is mind view and these sort of mind mapping things I love. That sort of suits the way my brain works. But other people, equally, I know people that are not neurodivergent, and they also mind map. So, it's offering as many different ways of doing things. So offering when we give pre-reading, for example, it's not all written content. We might give TED Talks, or, try and find a radio program or a podcast where they've sort of discussed the same issues. So I think it's being creative about, your sort of pre-reading and other things. And where we're going is really trying to move from where these things are difficulties to where they are just a difference. So by creating that inclusive environment and moving away, obviously, from what I think is the disability, where it feels a disability. And I think for most of us, that was in school, because school was very unaccommodating. So the other thing to address this leaky pipeline is the bespoke outreach that was mentioned right at the beginning. And this is the To Empower programme. Should be registered as a charity anytime soon. It really came out of this. I want to try and encourage more students and give more students the confidence that actually they can be scientists. The worst thing I find is that, if we have, we can have some amazing A-star students that are very good at knowledge sort of retention and recall, but they're not very good in terms of being innovative. And actually that is a critical thing as a scientist. So the types of workshops we run, we have professors and people that are neurodiverse themselves helping to design the workshops and deliver the workshops. I won't go into details, but I'm going to show you something in a minute if I can. And we got interested in the cyber area because obviously this is an area where there are a lot of neurodiverse employees. And the last workshop that we developed was during lockdown. And so we had to change it from being something online to being, from being something face-to-face to being online. And actually it worked out a lot of fun. We worked with, we had some funding to do it. We worked with a theatre company, Angel Exit Theatre. And these are the two actors here that got, as you can see, got into character for this activity. And we did a lot of these cool challenges, and this was for autistic children. Now, let's see if this will, can you just tell me if it's not loud enough?
Expert minds needed to take part in a new interactive online problem-solving challenge.
Have you got what it takes?
London, 1968.
Oh, sorry.
Expert minds needed to take part in a new interactive online problem-solving challenge.
Have you got what it takes?
London, 1968.
Shirley Johnson, GCHQ, has been keeping a watchful eye on a new recruit.
What's he up to?
Suspicious activity involving coded postcards has been intercepted.
I need to know if he can be trusted. Help!
Working together with real engineers, you can help solve this mystery in a challenging but fun workshop.
My name's Ahmad, and I'm a computer engineer. We're looking for some great minds around the world to come and join our team. We're going to work together to help get to the bottom of Grace and Shirley's little security breach. I'll show you how to use Enigma rotors and logarithms to help us crack the case, put our heads together, and see if we can work out what's going on.
If you think you've got what it takes, join Shirley, her boss Grace, and our engineers for this online 2Empower cybersecurity challenge. Developed by the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park in collaboration with Imperial College London and Angel Exit Theatre.
Good luck.
Challenges are designed for ages 14 and above, with some specifically for young autistic people.
Great. So that was just the intro for the or the marketing for that, and we had students. We limited it because it was for autistic students, so we could. I think we ended up with 12 students on it in different small groups with facilitators, but they did the activities. It took them from 10 o'clock till 2 o'clock. They were totally engaged. It was great because we had students able to join from all across the UK. For autistic students, they met the facilitator in the week before, so they felt comfortable, and so we did a lot of sort of adjustments, but it was actually worked really well for those students because they didn't have to come to a new place, meet a load of new people, and do sort of some challenging science. And so obviously I'm sure you are aware of this, and this is just how do we make things inclusive? And I think the UCD is on this mission as well, so it's really great to be here and talk to you today. And I'm sure this one is familiar to you, but I love it. So I'd just like to finish there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, I think, if I can.
So thank you so much, Sarah. Really enjoyed that presentation, and actually in particular you had a slide on adjustments which I felt was great. And just while the questions are coming in, actually maybe I'll get the ball rolling with a couple of my own. In terms of the adjustments, and when I think of your second to last slide about equity versus equality, but in terms of adjustments, how can we work within organizations to ensure that that menu of adjustments is more widely available?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something, I was really thinking about this today, that most organizations have an equality diversity center, and then they have HR. And really those things are, you know, EDI should just be embedded in HR. And I think this is problematic. The way that we see EDI is like, it's an add-on, it's an optional, and it really just needs to be embedded. So for example, you know, we should, when we do management training, this should be part of management training, because you are going to have, you know, 15-20%, you're going to have people that are coming along, you're going to be managing them. And actually, from what I know from Imperial, you know, a lot of the problems we have, or you know, where managers, and I know that, you know, cases where managers aren't, oh, I've done something, managers don't understand. And for example, I know a specific case where, you know, in terms of science, and the manager's sort of saying, oh, this needs to be done this way, and the neurodiverse person is saying, oh, you know, that doesn't work for me, I need to do it this way. And they've sort of had this impasse, and you think, well, they're the person doing it, so let them, as long as it's accurate, as long as it gives the same result, what is the issue? But some people are just that sort of like, no. so yes, because it is interesting, because when you talk about disability and reasonable adjustments, I think most HR senior management start thinking, you know, they see pound signs and, you know, euro signs, so, and they're like, oh, you know, how expensive. But it's not expensive. You know, lots of things that make a big difference are not expensive. So I think, yes, message. And I think if it's interesting, because there are, as I say, there are lots of websites, there are lots of things, and you know, it would be good to, I think we need people need a skills passport, so when they move from one manager to another, they can sort of go in, and I know that's something that they have in the civil service, so they sort of have a skills passport that say, right, this is what I need. I'm, you know, and these are my strengths, you know, this is how to use me, make use. I think in university, one of our problems as academics is the expectation is that we do everything. You know, as an academic, you sort of function on your own, and you aren't given much. It's not until you're very senior that you get any sort of admin support. And so I think this is why for us, we find it really challenging. At least I did.
Thank you, Sarah. And you know what, Ken is he's been gathering all the questions, but just before I quieten down a little bit, one final question for you. I was speaking to somebody recently, and they asked me the question. They said, when did mathematics become all about reading? There was a time they said that mathematics was about numbers, but now in school, it seems to be the case that there's a lot of, you know, linear writing and all of these descriptions of the mathematics. And I don't know if I'm conveying myself properly.
No, I think what you're saying is exactly that. It's so for me. So for example, for me, and I like when I was doing my, you know, GCSE revision with my kids, you know, there'd be a graph, and I can look at the graph, and then I can work, but they'd have like half a page of, you know, so-and-so go and buys 2 lollies, and then she goes up to the shop and does this, and she walks this way 3 miles and that way 4 miles, and yeah, and then you're testing comprehension, which is something very different to mathematics. I think that's what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah. And even I found, well, the classic with me was my son when he was doing biology, and they were saying, oh, you know, okay, 2 trays of seedlings, 1 cover with polythene, which one grows the best and why? And he was like, well, the one with polythene. And then he's like thinking, and you know, you're thinking, well, it's obvious, isn't it? But if, as a neurodiverse person, you won't give the obvious answer because it's not interesting to you. So he will come up with something like, oh, it's because the insects or the rats can't get to it because you've got the polythene over it. And you think, that's correct, but it's not the answer they want. And they don't, and when you're younger, you don't understand that they do, you know, they are asking for a specific answer. You know, they're sort of almost doing this thing where, you know, these are the questions, these are the answers we want, but we're going to sort of ask these questions in very obtuse ways to try and get the answer out of you. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that I have that I find problematic, but I do think, and yes, there could, as somebody said, there could be lots of answers to the question, but the problem is the people that mark them are very much, and I know this because I have friends that do marking of these exams as teachers, and they just basically told, you know, it's this or this. And the thing that I found really shocking recently was that I found out that in an A-level science exam, if you draw a diagram, they ignore that. They only take what you've written as text. So if you explain something like I would do, and actually it's interesting because we're being encouraged to do that now with when we submit scientific papers with graphical abstracts. Anyway, I'll wait for other questions.
Super. Thank you, Sarah. And Ken.
So, Sarah, thanks very much. The presentation was great. And just a very quick question to start off with. Just going back to the very, very start of your presentation, came in from Nina. With the percentage of stats of people with ADHD, ASD from England, UK, GB, the world, she said, sorry, didn't catch it.
The UK, yeah. So the Royal Society. Oh, sorry, no, the right at the beginning. Oh, it's so long ago that I made that slide. I couldn't tell you, to be, if I'm really honest.
No problem at all. Just the next one came in from Krista Sloan, which is a really interesting question. What do you think of university programs that are designed by the student and self-paced?
Well, I think it's great, as long as you have a mix of students. I think one of the things that I found is that you can have students that are very keen to do this and change things to the way that they think that you know, everything should be delivered. So if you get an autistic student, for example, they will have a very different way that they would like to be taught to, say, somebody that's dyslexic. And we have to, when we're designing whole courses, we have to think about getting balance overall. And that's what I try and do with the assessments, so that you know, not all your assessments. So for example, we had a year in medicine which was all assessed, but with extended essays and exams that were essays. So we now change that completely because that's not balanced.
Here, this is an interesting question from Yidel Lamboy Morales, and it's probably looking into the future and the science of the future. And it's, what do you think the approach should be in the near future for children born into the Artemis program regarding the colonization of the Moon and Mars? And thinking of the close environments and restrictions on movement in small spaces and with short views, etc. So should neurodeveloped children be going to Mars?
Oh God. Well, I think you'd need them there to solve all your problems. You know, that's exactly, and they will want, you know, imagine the ADHD will be the risk takers. They'll be the ones keen to go. And I think if you are familiar with the work of Helen Taylor, who's a sort of more of an anthropologist and looking at the evolution of dyslexia, she sort of very much thinks that, you know, these people that think in different ways are really the explorers in the world, and that's their function, is to sort of invent things, and that's why we've survived. So yes, I think, and the evidence there is that actually, you know, the whole point about civilization, the whole point about, you know, superiority maybe of the human race is the fact that we do work and live in communities and we collaborate, and we need a mixture of different ways of thinking. So that cognitive diversity is really important in us achieving everything.
Okay, thanks. Just a question just from myself more than anything else. And I was noting during your presentation you were talking about co-working, and that may not work for particularly students with ASD. I, like, it's New Year's Celebration Week, I've been doing a ton of talks myself, and I was doing one for University of Limerick, which is a large university on the west coast of Ireland, today at lunchtime. And one of the things I was recommending for students with ADHD was co-working, and the type of things where, you know, you get together, come up with a particular topic, you go off, research it, repeat it back to the other person, show that you've learned it, and things like that. And so you're looking at two different approaches for someone who may actually have those two conditions together. So how do universities square the circle of the differences within people with neurodiverse conditions?
Well, I don't think they do.
Okay.
I don't think they do. I don't see this happening in universities very effectively, and I think we are playing catch up. So I think it's interesting because I'm not an educational specialist, but I'm a neurodiverse academic. The reason I started working on this was because I was seeing mental health problems in my neurodiverse students when I was the senior welfare tutor. And that was because they were being asked to do a lot of things that they were, constantly, for example, these constant extended essays. And so it was just thinking, and then people said to me, oh yeah, that's normal for them to have problems in that year. And I'm like, well, why don't we do something about it? Why aren't we being proactive? Why is it okay? Because what is the point of writing all these extended essays anyway? So I think, yes, I think people just haven't looked at it. And I have been, the person sort of leading this and bringing the education centre on board with it, trying to get other academics engaged with it. It's not just a norm, and it's like I was saying that this should be embedded in HR likewise, and that's why we've developed that course, which is very basic, but at least it makes people think, oh yeah, actually this isn't going to work for everybody, and maybe I should provide alternative assessments, which people are horrified by that, but I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, thanks so much. Just may I say, we've been working with lots of universities in ADHD Ireland. As we're saying, I was with University of Limerick today, and we were also talking to Trinity College here during the week about setting up support groups and other initiatives. Again, obviously, we're here with UCD today and other universities around the country. But one of the things you mentioned there about being lecturers and, probably a higher percentage of them being neurodiverse. And you talked about the issue of disclosure. Is that a challenge today in third level for both academics and for students coming through the system?
I think there are more students year on year that are disclosed, and that's because more are being diagnosed. But definitely with senior academics, and there's still the negative stigma associated with it. It's really challenging. I don't know any other professor in my university that is willing to actually talk about their neurodiversity. I know some have told me confidentially, but they're not willing to talk about it. And then there are a lot of people that are just not going to go there. And I think to some extent it's because they've spent, they've had all those challenges, they've had all that negative things from when they were children. Some of them have had sort of these convoluted career paths where they've had to retake exams and do this and do that to be successful. And I think for some people, they just want to put that behind them don't want to go there, don't want to address it. And I think they do really, they don't even, because they haven't gone there, as it were, they don't appreciate actually how much it affects everything they do. Because as you know, with ADHD, it's not just learning, it's your whole way of being, isn't it? So.
And Sarah, I see some more questions coming in from the audience. Here is a question. Some students with ADHD and dyslexia should be having verbal tests instead of written ones. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm totally up for it. I really, I don't see the issue. And I think once, you know, if you are a professor and you have, you know, if I am examining a student, I examine them in lots of different ways. You know, I examine them doing a poster presentation where they present it verbally, and I look at the visuals of the poster presentation as well. I also get them to do executive summaries of things and grant writing. I'm totally up for, you know, having a range of different assessments, and verbal communication is so important for everything that you do in future life. You know, people, again, I think there's this weird sort of thing in academia where, you know, writing a book is like the best, you know, it's seen like, oh, the greatest thing. It just doesn't do it for me. You know, I much prefer to go and see somebody give a great talk. So, yeah.
And thank you, Sarah, for fielding that question. There's another question here. Sometimes people include lifelong mental illness in neurodiversity, as these can affect the way people perceive and interact with the world around them. Do you feel this is accurate, or are they thought of as a separate group of conditions to those in neurodiversity?
Yeah, as I say, I am not an expert in that area. I do absolutely know that, you know, as somebody that's neurodiverse and knowing lots of neurodiverse people, you know, we are more susceptible to mental health conditions, and so there is that link, definitely. But I don't see that as the same thing, to be honest, because neurodiversity is something where it's fundamental to your way of being. It doesn't come and go.
Yes.
Like a mental health illness.
I sorry, Sarah, for jumping in, but I just connected with what you're saying. I feel that if I am neurodivergent, it is me. Whereas I hope if I have a mental health illness, I hope that it may be passing, it may be treatable, if you will.
It's something you recover from, isn't it? You will get better if with the right sort of treatment, etc. So, but I think when I look at that data on disability, which the Royal Society study, the mental health illness, which is concerned, it's considered a disability, and that is the biggest growing group of students, and so actually they're sort of a bigger group now than students with specific learning differences. So they are something. I mean, I think we're all aware that, you know, mental health in young people is something that needs huge amounts of support, etc. In terms of universities. Well, it's interesting to see. I've just opened up the chat. It's people from all over
the world.
Yes, this is brilliant. Oh, from Texas. Well, I should be in Texas in a couple of weeks, Krista. I'm going to be in Austin in a few weeks for my niece's wedding, so looking for that. Michigan, know people in Michigan. Brilliant. Seattle. I've never been to Seattle.
India, all around the world.
This is amazing. Really interesting.
Yes, and I'm
I think
conscious.
one of the things we were talking yesterday was the sort of mental, the sort of energy that it takes. You know, it can be really tiring if you're neurodiverse. I was, yeah, find things, I mean, by the time it gets to the evening, it's interesting with some of these conferences going online now, that sometimes I'm being asked to give a talk sort of, you know, like 1 o'clock in the morning. My brain is not working at 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, this is just never going to happen, and it's yeah, really weird. Oh, somebody from North Carolina, that's where my sister is, in Raleigh.
And I'm here. I'm either like a weather forecaster with my Zoom background, or I have notions of taking over the world. Who can say? I'm conscious that we're almost out of time, Sarah. There are actually so many questions. There's more in the chat, and there's more follow-up questions I'm sure Ken and I would like to ask. Ken, any concluding questions for Sarah?
Well, no, I really just thanks Sarah for her input and her insight. It's wonderful to hear it and see it. And I think, you know, having looked through the chat myself earlier, people have found it inspiring.
Absolutely. And I know we will be circulating the video. Is it possible to circulate slides, Sarah, or do you have an abridged version of them or anything like that?
I can send you the PDF of them, yeah, I guess. Perfect. That's probably the easiest.
That would be wonderful. So certainly I've learned a lot. I've been taking notes, including your references to Prof Amanda Kirby and her books and her Do It profiler. So yeah, certainly, while I'll be off for my tea now, I hope all of the people who joined us this evening have enjoyed the session. Our thanks, of course, to myself, Mr. Ken Kilbride and Miss Beth Kilkenny, and most of all to yourself, Professor Sara Rankin of Imperial College London. I think you've encouraged us to look at STEM and to say, well, how can we get into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and also to look at neurodivergence and neurodiversity on this Neurodiversity Celebration Week. So it's a lovely bookend to the week. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, guys. Follow me if you want to hear about any other events that we are running, because through our network, so you can join as well. Join our events as well. Okay, brilliant.
Thank you very much
for the invite.
Take care
Bye.
now. Bye everyone.